Hello and welcome to KFAM 189.16. I am your host, Miles Goldsmith, but in all seriousness, welcome to Game Design Hour. I am your host, Miles Goldsmith. On each episode, I sit down with the people who create the video games you know and love. On today's episode, I am sitting down with the amazing people behind the video game Killer Frequency, which explains my weird intro. I mean, it's not weird if you played the game. A little weird if you don't fully know what I'm talking about, but I will warn you, this is a spoiler interview. So if you haven't played the game and you want to, go play the game, come back, watch this interview. We will be talking about a bunch of spoilers in the game. Without any further ado, let's meet our guests and get into the interview.
Hi, my name's Chris Chester. I'm a senior producer here at Team 17. I was the lead producer for Killer Frequency.
I'm John Lappin. I'm a game designer at Team 17, and I was a game designer and writer on Killer Frequency.
So what was the first thing that sparked both of your interest in creating video games?
So personally, I fell into the industry a little bit. Like, I got my first job in video games with Sega in Chiswick, and I just got it through a reference from a friend who said they had some jobs going, started a role in QA, and here I am 13 years later. I've always loved playing video games, but yeah, to be honest, I never sort of, at least in my early 20s, up until that point, never envisaged a career in the industry, and just sort of fell into it, but I'm very grateful that I did.
Yeah, I've been playing games since I can remember, basically. Started on hand-me-down Master System and Super Nintendo. Didn't really realize that video games was a career that people could have when I was a young kid. That didn't clock on till quite a bit later. But I think once it got to that point, I knew that's all I wanted to do. It was the one sort of passion that had continued from childhood through to teenage years. So put all my focus into that going forward.
How did the initial idea for Killer Frequency come about?
So it started off as an entry into Adventure Jam 2019 with a small team of people from Team 17. And neither of us were actually in that original concept team. But yeah, so there were about 10 people from Team 17 who worked in their spare time over the period of about 2 weeks in 2019 to create the sort of 15-minute free version of the game, entered it into Adventure Jam. It did really well. It got a lot of pickup from influencers. People really liked it. And the company, went from there, decided to greenlight, making a full version of the game.
So different parts of the game seem to play homage to classic and popular horror franchises with names, locations, that sort of stuff. For both of you, which different pieces of media inspired elements of the game?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. There's quite a lot. So the easy one is probably my personal favorite horror series is Scream. And I think there's quite a lot of Scream in Killer Frequency, inherently with the phone call nature. But also my first horror love really was video games. So there's a lot of classic horror games in there. Anytime I could kind of try and sneak a reference in, there would be one. Obviously, very inspired by having a choice-based narrative in horror from stuff like Supermassive's games, Dark Pictures, and Until Dawn, and the like. So, yeah, I think those were probably the main ones. But any reference that I could get in would go in.
And yeah, I'd say I'm a big fan of Pontypool and The Fog, which were both big influences for the Game Jam version. So yeah, when I got the opportunity to work on this, I jumped at the chance. And yeah, like as John said as well, I'm a fan of horror video games as well. So yeah, like big fan of the Resident Evil series. It's was great.
Pretty much every game has strange or interesting ideas that were brainstormed for it at one point, but just never made it into a draft or ended up getting cut. What were some of those sort of strange or interesting ideas that ended up getting cut from Killer Frequency?
I remember one that was, I think, just before I sort of came onto project. We don't anymore have a rooftop to the radio station. And at one point, there was an idea to have a sequence where the player would be on the rooftop and could kind of see out into the town as the Whistling Man was going about his business. That fell to the wayside for a number of reasons that probably because it was before me, Chris would be better to go into the specifics on. But that was definitely one that got brought up a few times as that would have been cool. There was a few other puzzles that changed pretty drastically throughout development. yeah, we have internal code names for all of our puzzle sequences, or all of our sequences really. And one of them is called Save Clive. And if you've played the game, you know that you cannot save Clive. So that was a very different sequence that just sort of kept its legacy going forward, at least in the back end.
I think both my favorite and least favorite idea that got cut from the game was my own suggestion, which was quickly battered away by design early on in the process of a Hitchcock-inspired Rear Window DLC for the game. But yeah, that's why I'm not on the design team, and I just keep things going with the schedules.
So the game starts with a tutorial where the player learns the controls and all that stuff, but at the end of the tutorial, the player is attacked by the Whistling Man. This is then acknowledged by Forrest, who talks about hearing a scream. As far as I've seen, it isn't revealed who that person you play as in the tutorial is. Is there a specific person that you all have in mind for the character that the player gets to play as in the tutorial?
There is, yeah. At first, we didn't have a direct identity. It was just the person who gets killed in the opening. But we did eventually decide that it made sense for it to be Clive, which a lot of people actually have speculated, which was kind of impressive because we didn't really leave many breadcrumbs for it in the end. But that is who we've got as the identity of the unfortunate soul.
And I think that like the identity of that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, John, came quite late. But bizarrely, we built the intro sequence quite early, and then it was sort of retroactively fitted into the plot, right?
Yeah, we didn't decide on, like I said earlier, the Save Clive puzzle. Clive's role was very different until later on. So yeah, he wasn't dying at that point because he wasn't even potentially going to die. So it sort of worked out and it made sense. But yeah, it all came together much later. It wasn't a one coherent vision, as a lot of things in game development aren't.
Yeah, I think partly my fault for the changes with Clive, right? Because I think some of that came down to us having to cut some scope mid-development, which is obviously always a really difficult decision to make. Yeah, so design and the writing team had to make some quick changes in order to keep the scope down. So yeah, it was great work from them to do that.
What did Clive's original storyline look like before it got cut?
So I'm only really aware of the one that we ended up going with. I think he was always down as sort of our red herring killer, but his whole sort of role as being a fixer for the Gallows family was not a thing until a lot later into the game. We were kind of trying to figure out what his connection was to everything. He existed as a concept, as a red herring, but he had no tie to anything. So his role ended up changing in that aspect much later on. So I'm not really sure what his original sort of role would have been outside of being a red herring before we made that change. It wasn't sort of set in stone.
I think I can remember a few things about Clive in terms of do you know that the room in the game where it's like loads of mannequins and you find the map with the string and everything. So originally Clive was meant to have been throwing mannequins into the river to test how quickly the bodies float downstream, which was then tied into a puzzle. And I think we were talking about you were going to have to, look up the speed of the flow of water and where people could have been, bodies could have been dumped into the river and stuff. And I think that puzzle just sounded a bit naff, right, in terms of people having to use maths calculations to figure out where bodies had been thrown into the river. And I think as well at that point, like Clive was just a janitor of the station, and as John said, like the whole fixer section came later. But yeah, he was meant to be this sort of creepy red herring, but with this weird mannequin thing going on. But we ended up really liking the art style of that room so much, right, that the mannequins stayed, and Clive's role changed a bit.
Throughout the game, you all give the player a ton of freedom with how they handle each of the situations. Did giving the players all this freedom cause any issues? And if so, how did you resolve them?
Yeah, we had to actually scope back people's freedom a bit. The original versions of a lot of the puzzle sequences were a lot more windy with a lot more branches, and we did not have the resources to facilitate all of those different branches. So a lot of them ended up getting called back to get to what was really important, We also had there's a mechanic or feature in the game where if you try to leave the room that you're in when something important is happening, the game won't let you. We didn't have that until very late. And what we found in playtesting was that people would start a conversation, get distracted by something they'd remembered earlier on, leave the room, and then miss all the vital, important information to actually solve what was going on. So we almost had to sort of protect the player from themselves by keeping them in the room. So that was an example of how we had to really cut back on the player's freedom to do what they want in that situation. Because being a VR and flat screen title, we were limited because the original Game Jam game, the player sits at the desk and they are in the desk until they finish the call. We couldn't do that with VR. We had to have the player at a freestanding desk.
And I think it's worth mentioning, yeah, like we're limited in our ability to test everything. Like I have to say, like it is a job really well done by the QA team to get everything tested. You know, yeah, the more branches you're adding in, the more freedom for the player. It just starts multiplying the test time and the test effort exponentially, right? So part of the decision to put in some of those restrictions and the amount of branching and like dialogue choices that we could have in the game, was down to that ability to test in the time available, really, and to make it fair on the test team. Like they had a hard enough job as it is.
I think the approach ended up being go a bit wild and then rein it in rather than start by reining it in. Whether that was the right approach, I think people seem to like the game, so I guess in the end it was the right approach. But yeah, it did cause us some headaches later about which of our things that we liked we had to get rid of.
Yeah, I think we had to make some difficult decisions, like quite fairly late on in development, about cutting a number of quests as we call them. But you know, there would be those like sort of puzzle sequences, which had to sort of fall to the cutting room floor. But I think as John said, we made the right decisions, and it was. But yeah, there were definitely some tough choices towards the end of development around those.
As you talked about, playtesting with all these branching possibilities is difficult. How did playtesting work for this game, and what sort of important pieces of information did you learn through playtesting?
So we sort of had a multi-layered approach to playtesting. So we would try and do it as early as possible. Because we needed sort of a customized version of the tools, Code were working on those while we were developing all of the puzzles. So the very first time that we ever tested these sequences was actually just a table read where the designer would sit with somebody who hadn't been exposed to the puzzle yet, and they would talk through it like it was a table read, and the player would have to try and solve the puzzle without being in the game whatsoever. That was necessary for the time we had and the timeline we were on. It did make things tricky because this is a game where in two different fashions, you don't want to give people too much information and you don't want to give people not enough information. Both from a puzzle aspect, you don't want to give people the answer straight away and they feel bored listening to the rest of it. And you don't want them to feel like they were cheated out of the right answer. But it's also a mystery narrative, and we don't want people to figure it out too soon, but we want people to feel like they could have figured it out. So having these early sequences be playtested with no game meant that you almost had to embellish certain things you wanted to call out. So another sequence that I worked on was the Roller Ricky sequence. That one has a lot of audio cues in it that the player has to pay attention to. So it is naturally going to have an effect if you are talking through a sequence and then you go, the train rushes loudly by, because then the player knows that's relevant. So it was never the ideal scenario, but we did get information out of it that was useful. When we got to the actual in-engine playtests with the usability team, those were quite fascinating to see how players sort of took certain bits of information, both from a narrative standpoint and from a puzzle standpoint. What bits did they gravitate to? What bits did they sort of ignore? And also you sort of get this understanding of people's inherent sort of biases or lived experiences. So in the Maurice Russell puzzle, the player gets a basic floor plan and they are told about all the different rooms, and you have to guide Maurice and the killer to different rooms by phoning different phone extensions. The problem for a couple people was they had a different idea of what a boardroom looks like. Some people thought it was a room with like fully glass and you can see through it the whole time, and some people thought it was an enclosed space with no windows or doors. Well, obviously no windows in the door. So people wouldn't go the route we wanted them to because they thought the killer would just see through the boardroom. So it was then trying to figure out, how likely is it that people have that? Do we give them enough information to dispel that idea? You know, it's all about weighting the benefits and the disadvantages of every decision that you make.
And you talk about the boardroom. I can remember the discussion about could we use the word green room, right? Because for the hot wiring puzzle, the magazine with the solution to it was originally hidden in the green room, but a lot of people didn't actually realize what a green room was and were looking for a room that had like loads of green lighting or wallpaper or green wallpaper on the walls and stuff, and they wouldn't pick up on it because they didn't have that prior knowledge of what a green room was. I think it's worth saying in terms of the testing of the game that as well, we had the entire team would play pretty much every week together, and then we'd have feedback sessions as a group every week. So whenever we were putting in a new feature or a new piece of content, we'd make sure that we came together as a team, all played it together, talked about it, and tried to sort of figure out what was working and what wasn't working, which really worked well for us, paid dividends.
Most of the characters who we get to interact with throughout the game, we only get to talk to them over the phone and hear their voice, which makes all of the storytelling about their character done through the voice acting. What was it like to work with the voice actors to bring these characters to life?
I mean, from my experiences, the voice actors were all unbelievable, really. And I think the reviews have kind of shown that there's so much love for the voice actors. In some cases, when we got the auditions through, some characters sounded exactly like how you thought they would sound, and some sounded completely different but still sounded correct. Like, I know one that for me was Plunker, the frat boy. He sounded nothing like what I thought Plunker was going to sound like, but now I can't imagine him sounding like anything else. So yeah, some of our voice actors pull multiple roles, and it is hard to tell that it is the same person, if not basically impossible.
I think Peggy was unanimous in terms of the casting. That, yeah, as John said, I think when we cast Peggy, we all came out of that audition and were like, yep, that's the person who we want as Peggy. Like, yeah, she was great. And I think it was a really interesting process, at least for me, in terms of I think Jack on the design team had worked with voiceover before, but other than Jack, none of the rest of us had done any games which had at least this significant amount of voiceover in it. And going through that casting process for the first time, and then the recording and sort of meeting like the voiceover directors and things like that was a really fascinating process and a really great learning process as well. Like, yeah, I think we fit in all the auditions in about a 2-week period, which was, yeah, just so hectic, like massively busy and trying to keep on with like regular project work at the same time. Yeah, I think as John said, like, yeah, we got great voice actors, right? Like they really did a great job for us, and yeah, they're fantastic.
I'd like to shout out everyone at Side as well, because we wouldn't have been able to have those performances without them. Like, they really carried that one through. Like Chris said, we weren't that experienced with handling voice recordings, so having their experience was invaluable.
Yeah, Side were great, fantastic, and really, really good to work with, guided us through the process.
Which parts of Killer Frequency did both of you have to put the most time and effort into to kind of get it just the way you wanted it?
Trying to think. I think the puzzle that I worked on that had the most iteration was the Roller Ricky call. That one was originally a lot more of a puzzle than ended up being. It is now more of a narrative event that happens, which that was a whole discussion between us on the internal writing team and Cash, who was our external writer. That was his feedback. there was a little bit of trepidation about removing essentially a puzzle from the game because we're primarily a puzzle game. So, you don't necessarily want to lose one of those, but I think having seen everyone play it now and, having experienced the end of development, it feels like it was definitely the right choice. The sequence has enough of an impact as it is that it didn't need the whole sort of you proving to Peggy that you knew something was wrong. It just sort of labored the point a bit. In terms of a puzzle that took a while to initially come together, maybe the Maurice puzzle. There was a lot of back and forth on the layout of the room, trying to communicate what the routes were for people. That one probably took a while.
I can think being caught out by editor several times in early development, right? And saying to you guys, like, I think this is way too difficult. And I think in the end you made it a little bit easier than it was initially, because even with knowing that's like the solution, I'd still fail doing it like 50% of the time.
Is there anything that both of you wish you knew before starting work on the game?
How wildly different VR is to develop for. Like, it is such a different, like, I don't know, it's like, it's not even a different platform, right? Like, it's almost like a different, like, ecosystem in terms of the amount of work that we had to put in for developing features for VR as well as flat screen. And as a studio and as a team, we had a lot of experience in developing like games for flat screen, but it was the first VR title that most of us had worked on. And like it was a massive surprise. We went into like initial project planning thinking, I think we put aside a month to get doors working in VR, and it ended up taking us nearly 6 months, right, to actually get doors where we wanted them, right? And you could say that for any number of like things that you would think are pretty simple, right? Like drawers and containers, the way that your hands, sort of feel and interact with the world, which is obviously really important with VR for that sort of both immersion and sort of sense of tactility. Yeah, they took significantly more effort than we thought going into it. Yeah,
I think I would just echo Chris. Like he said, basically, almost none of us had any VR experience, so it was developing a new type of game with a lot of new different types of processes, and then basically making 2 of that game at the same time. So I think we got there in the end. We figured it out, but having a starting point that was a little bit higher might have made the process a little bit smoother to get started.
And another thing that I would have liked to have known at the start going in was knowing that the story was going to come together, because I can remember sitting into like some of the early narrative workshops and like sitting there at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night and just thinking, oh my God, this isn't going to come together, is it? Because I think, the design team had not got a huge amount of experience in terms of writing and absolutely knocked it out of the park. But dear God, there was definitely a couple of evenings where I was sat there in silence on a call with my camera off, like just quietly panicking. But it all worked out in the end, and I wish someone had said to me back then it'll work out. It would have saved me a hell of a lot of anxiety.
Throughout the game, Ponty calls the station a bunch of different times. Was there ever a draft of the story for the game where Ponty was attacked by the Whistling Man?
I don't think there was. Harry came up with Ponty and I think wrote all of his calls. There was more Ponty calls, but we needed to cut scope somewhere, and Ponty phoning up for the 8th time didn't feel like it was necessary. So I don't think there was ever a point that he died. I think, or was at risk of dying, I should say. He was probably a bit too precious to the design team to kill off.
Yeah, just had to cut down the word count a little bit on that.
Are there any fun, small little details that you've added into the game that you really like, but you don't really see too many players notice?
I think there's a lot of, I mean, like I said before, there's a lot of references. There's some references that I always get a bit of joy out of when I see somebody discover and recognize. There's a couple of sort of Easter eggs that are in the game that I haven't really seen anybody get yet. There's one to do with the safe in Reggie's office. If you put the release year of one of our most popular games in, you'll get something. And also, if you ask for the slow roast pizza in the takeout Virginia puzzle, and then play the rest of the game and get the good ending, you get a little bit extra.
I think bit that I don't see players get. So I would say that on all of the record sleeves in the record box, all of the record sleeves. So Tom Street, who's one of the artists who worked on the game, he put a lot of effort into those record sleeves, and actually you can't see a lot of the detail because it's really far down into the box. But if you pull open the records and then sort of look down, you can just about see on like every record there is like the credits on it, so like vocals and guitar by and things, which like I think all of them are references to people who worked on the development team at various stages. But yeah, the amount of detail that went into those was really massive, and I really like the I think players like see them, but whether people actually like stop and look, I'm not sure. The posters that are on the walls all around the station, like again, really great work from the art team, putting those together, putting a lot of detail into them, and as John said, like a lot of references around on those.
Throughout the game, at least I personally viewed the recording studio as a sort of safe space where the characters were safe, and venturing out of the recording studio was when Forrest was in danger. But really the only time when Forrest interacts with the Whistling Man face to face is in the recording studio. Can you tell me a bit about the decision to have the player only really interact with the Whistling Man in a space that I think many players viewed as like their safe space?
Yeah, I think whether it was fully intentional or not, I think it's definitely a case of, say, Resident Evil has the safe rooms and you have the nice safe room music and you feel content, but then there are instances where enemies can break into the safe room and then it is not so safe. So I think it's on that sort of line. I think there's sort of an irony about having this safe space that ends up being the one place where the killer sort of shows up, although it's still safe because you are also in a different room. You're in Peggy's very safe room. So yeah, I think it felt like it would be the wrong decision for Forrest to be in peril really for most of the game. He isn't the source of the Whistling Man's vengeance. He isn't the source of the fear in the game. It is all about the callers. So having him sort of pottering around the station didn't make sense. And if he did keep showing up, it sort of raised questions as to why he didn't just interfere more with the person who's stopping him. I think that was mainly what it was. It didn't fit the theme of the game to have him be in danger quite so much until the end.
So let's talk about the different endings to the game. With so many different choices that the player can make and so many different combinations of who lives and dies, including endings where both Forrest and Peggy die, can you tell me a bit about how you landed on the different endings that you currently have, and if there were any other possible endings that were thought about but never made it in?
Yeah, I would be... Okay, start with the ones that are actually in the game. So we knew we wanted sort of a best ending and a worst ending and an in-between, the bare minimum. There are some variations on the in-between. We didn't want players to... Because the finale sequence is kind of long. It's a fairly long, stalled-out interview. So if players had done so poorly throughout the game, we didn't want people to sit through a 25-minute sequence only to be told they'd done so badly it didn't matter what they'd done during that whole point. So there is an early out for the player at the start of that. We obviously wanted the everyone lives ending, especially with our secret room at the end for the epilogue with all the Polaroids on the screen. If somebody could die, it kind of takes away from the effect of seeing that clean sweep. The in-betweens, we wanted to have an element of, it's something that Harry talked about a lot, was thematically having sort of a through line, and that's, the revenge wasn't the right answer, as it usually is not. Dare say never is. So we had this whole thing where Henry is sort of a potentially redeemable character. If you go through the whole game and Henry doesn't kill anyone, we wanted an ending where when he is sort of sent to kill Forrest, that he has a crisis of conscience, and that was a success for the player and that Forrest didn't die. We did have plans to have sort of a reveal of which whistling man had attacked which person, but that didn't end up making it into the game. So it's a little bit opaque, but as long as players do well enough, then there's a good chance they'll end up with that ending. There's also the ending where you just stalled enough. We did have an ending which got cut, but would have been a fun one, which is if you killed everybody up till the end, then Peggy would disappear after the lights out, and you would come back up to a box, like a present, on the table, and you would open it up, and it would have a whistling man mask in it, and Forrest would put the mask on and start whistling. So I think that would have been a fun sort of scorched earth ending, but it was a little bit wider of the scope of the rest of the endings. So unfortunately, it was the first one that went.
I think that's one of my biggest regrets of things that we had to cut from the game to get it over the line, was that ending. But yeah, unfortunately, you can't have everything. So yeah.
Looking back now, is there anything that you wish you could have done differently before the launch of the game?
There are elements of the game that it would have been nice to have included. We did talk about having a transcript that players could review to get a better idea of what had just been discussed, especially because the game's so popular with YouTubers and streamers. They're obviously going to be talking to their audience, and then they might miss something. The game maybe could do a better job of relaying that information back to the player if they need it. We also have multiple paths, but we don't have a great way currently of letting the player review previous calls. You have to basically go back to the entire start of the game and play it again. Ideally, there would have been maybe a call select that you could jump back in partway through. I think the main thing as far as development was just if we'd been able to have a more defined narrative, like the exacts of what happens, because that all came together quite late. We might have been able to strengthen some of the certain reveals and clues in a way that we maybe pushed through late on in the actual development.
I think for me, besides there is one text bug which really annoys me. I won't say what it is, but they were meant to be about 3 or 4 additional records that you can play, which we just didn't have time to get finished or get made, and have a few extra different genres of music in there. I think we were talking about an R&B track, and I think so there's one kind of hard rock track, but a bit of a hair metal track in there as well. I can't remember what the others were, but there were sort of 3 or 4 records which didn't make it in the end, which I think was a bit of a shame.
What do you both feel was the biggest lesson that you learned from working on Killer Frequency?
I think for me, it probably wasn't a lesson so much learned but reinforced, is that you can't be too proud about the things you're working on. So we all found out on the design and writing side that writing puzzles was very difficult, with all the complexities of not being able to see anything, so explaining everything, and the mystery aspect. Trying to write those entirely on your own and come back with sort of a finished first draft with no support was very, very difficult, almost impossible for all of us. So just having that wherewithal to go, you know what, I could have a 10-minute chat with somebody here, and they could recontextualize the problem that I'm having, and I might realize it's not even a problem, and then I can actually progress with what I'm doing. There were points where, because there's so much new going on, it was especially important to have that sort of camaraderie in those instances. And that's one of the things I'm particularly proud about in the games. I think we worked really well overall as a team, but within the design and writing team as well. Like, it was a very collaborative process.
I mean, I think I learned a lot of lessons during the development of the game. Like, picking one out is really difficult. Yeah, if you put people, like, put your trust in people that they're gonna do, that they're gonna do a good job. They generally are gonna do a good job, right? And if you have a really invested, engaged team who feel ownership over what they're doing and feel passionate about it, that really comes through in the end product, right?
Can fans of the game look forward to new content in the future?
So at the moment, we're just focused on this game, and yeah, there's no plans at the moment, but who knows what the future holds, right? Like, yeah, if the game continues to do well, that might change.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to go and create their first game?
For me, it's probably the piece of advice that I hear the most, which is just start making games. The worst thing you can do is sort of get yourself into a self-paralysis of just not starting. If you start something, you will always get better because you're actively working on it, you're actively improving, you're actively growing. If you wait for the right situation or the right team to come along, you're always waiting. So I would say just get started, just get making, work on something you're passionate about, something you're interested in.
And I'd say, I mean, yeah, very typically for a producer, do like plan basically, and that being agile and being able to respond to feedback and iterate on things doesn't mean not planning. And planning can really help, right? Like when we on Killer Frequency, when we got to the point which we've talked about of having to make some difficult choices, making some scope cuts to meet our deadlines and our budgets, having planned out ahead and sort of thought about the game in a bit of a more modular sense of, okay, well, these bits of the story and these sections of the puzzles are things that we could get rid of if we needed to. Knowing that up ahead and having a plan for that and having the scope scalable made it so much easier when we actually got to that point where we had to make those tough decisions. And yeah, like, expect to make tough decisions at some point. You will inevitably not have the time to do everything that you want to. And sometimes I think you get a better game from that, right? Like working within those constraints, having to get rid of, trim some of that fat. And yeah, you get a sort of, a more streamlined, more concentrated experience, right? And I think that can be a good thing.
What's next for both of you? What are you both working on now?
At the moment, I'm working on another one of our internal titles, which is Golf with Your Friends. That's something I worked on before Killer Frequency, and I'm back for the reunion tour.
And I'm just working on some other projects at the moment, and internal departmental management.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing both of you.
No, thank you, Miles. Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
And that was today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it and want to see more like it, make sure to follow or subscribe. It's different on every platform. Also, if you think a friend might like the show, make sure to share with them. Also, consider leaving us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you like the show. If you didn't like the show, avoid that review button with all your might. Just don't go there if you didn't like the show. But if you liked it, go leave us a review, please. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.